I'd like to call the meeting to order. And we'll start with roll call.
Ms. Close?
Here.
Ms. Weber?
Here.
Ms. Gaskin?
Here.
Ms. Owens?
Here.
Okay, so I'd like to approve the meetings for the December 12th meeting.
You need a motion?
Okay.
I'll make a motion
Okay.
to approve the minute meetings from the December 12th Creeks.
Do we need to second that? Can someone second that? Okay. Okay, I'll second that. Okay. All in order, all in favor of the minutes from December 12th, say aye.
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 I abstain. I wasn't here.
Abstain.
We don't have any adjustments for the agenda. And I don't think we've received any slips for public comment. And in terms of committee and staff communications, I just want to introduce and welcome Dr. Lori Gaskin, who's our newest member of the committee. You all have met her when we did a site visit out at the Santa Barbara Golf Club at one of our restoration projects, but this is the first time she's been able to be in a meeting when we're inside of a meeting room. So I just wanted to welcome her and thank you for being here.
Okay, so the next item on the agenda is the election of the vice chair.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. So normally the committee does the election of the vice chair at our January meeting, and the vice chair serves in place of the chair if the chair is absent for any of the meetings. And then our normal operating procedure is that the vice chair will become the chair at the January meeting, which is what happened in your case. And since we had our January meeting actually, our January meeting was canceled because of rain when we were supposed to be out in the field, and it was at our February meeting that we were at the municipal golf course. We didn't go through the process of nominating and selecting a vice chair, so we get to do that tonight in April. So it's a shortened term for vice chair, but you'll get to enjoy your full term as chair starting in January of 2020. So it's up to the committee to nominate and then second and vote for a vice chair.
We've done that. We've cast a vote, and someone's committed to. Okay.
I'd like to throw Lori right into this and nominate her.
I think she needs to vote and then a second.
Okay. Is anyone in favor of Lori? Please say aye.
Or I'll
Aye.
second that motion or the nomination. All in favor? Aye.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, next item is water quality public awareness survey results.
Actually, we have the item 8, the subcommittee appointments. So I'll discuss those a little bit. You can see in your packet you have a staff report that discusses this, but for the benefit of people watching at home, this Creeks Advisory Committee has a couple of subcommittees in place now. One is a standing committee, and that is our budget subcommittee, and that committee doesn't go away. Generally, in the past, the committee has elected to put the chair of the committee, the vice chair of the committee, and the immediate past chair of the committee as the three members of the budget subcommittee. You don't have to do that, but it's worked pretty well. Those are people who tend to be really involved in the details of the committee. The budget subcommittee tends to meet 2 to 3 times a year outside of these meetings. And then the second committee we're recommending is an ad hoc committee, which means it's not it's a committee that's for a specific purpose, and once that purpose is served, then the committee will dissolve. We're recommending to continue with the Education and Outreach Subcommittee. We're going to hear tonight the results of our Water Quality Public Opinion Survey, and we want to have the subcommittee work with staff and use those results to update our public education and outreach plan. And so we're recommending to continue with that committee. Ms. Weber and Ms. Owens are currently members of that subcommittee. You don't need to have 3 members. We have always had 3 in the past. 2 is sufficient, but you can't have 4 because we can't have a quorum on the subcommittee. So if you have, and the chair makes the appointments if anyone else is interested in serving on that subcommittee.
For the Education and Outreach Subcommittee, Penny, would you agree to do that?
Yeah, I'm happy to continue.
And
Happy
Betsy,
to
would
stay on
you?
that as well.
Okay. Okay, so we'll have Penny Owens and Betsy, I'm sorry, what's your last name? Weber.
So you want to leave that with 2 for now?
Yes.
Okay. And for the budget subcommittee, do you want to conform to the past practice of having the 3 members? So it would be Dr. Gaskin, Lee Moldaver, and you, Madam Chair.
Yes, the Budget Subcommittee would be Lee, myself, and Lori Gaskin.
Great. Thank you. No votes required. The chair can appoint those committees.
Finally, some power. Okay.
Madam Chair, if it's okay, I'm going to step aside for a moment and invite the Creeks Division Outreach and Education Coordinator, Liz Smith, up, and she will introduce our guests presenters tonight. Thanks.
Hi there, everyone. So I'm Liz Smith, the Creeks Outreach Coordinator, and as I hope you know, the Creeks Division has a very broad education and outreach program. We do a lot of television and radio advertising, social media outreach, youth education, community events like the upcoming Earth Day Festival. We hope to see you all there. Stop by the city's booth. As part of our program, every 5 years we conduct a large-scale public awareness survey. That's a requirement of the city's stormwater management program, and it helps us to kind of refocus our messaging and our outreach tactics. And so this past year, we hired Fairbanks, Maslin, Mullen, Metz & Associates, or FM3. I practiced. And tonight we have Richard Bernard and Laura Covarrubias here to present our findings.
Good evening. I want to thank the Commission for inviting us to report on your residents' attitudes and awareness about this topic. I'll start with the methodology. We interviewed a random sample of 1,447 City of Santa Barbara residents. The survey was conducted between August 8th and the 23rd of 2018. We did a dual mode survey, which means the surveys were randomly available online, and also we did it by telephone, both cellular and landlines. The surveys were available in English and Spanish. And for questions asked of everyone, the margin of error is plus or minus 2.6, so it's quite small. And if you're very good in math and you notice something doesn't quite add up to 100%, I blame that entirely on rounding error. Where we could, we tracked questions that were asked of in previous years, so you could get to see where trends are going. And before I get into the heart of the matter, I wanted to point out that this was the first time the survey has been done not only on the telephone, and that has implications for the results. When we do a survey online, individuals will have an option to say they're unsure or they don't know. On the phone, we allow them to volunteer that. Also, when we give them a list of choices and try to have them choose one item or another, we also give them the option to say all of the above. We do not do that on the phone, though if they volunteer it, we mark it. The implications are really important because the results, as you will see, are different across time, and I believe partly can be explained by this change in methodology because we have an increase of folks who are saying they're unsure or they don't know. So please keep that in mind. All right, so my task will be to talk a little bit about the storm drain pollution awareness and behavior. So we asked respondents, or we told them what storm drains are, that they're gutters and pipes and concrete channels that collect rain and water from the street. And when water goes into the storm drain in their area, we asked, does it get treated or is it not treated as it goes through the creeks and into the ocean? It's important to know if they understand the system. This is all part of awareness, as you know. And you could see the rows indicate treated, they said treated, not treated, or they were unsure. And then the columns are the responses in the different years. And in the brackets, you'll see what the sample sizes are. And the advantage of doing random online is that we tend to get a larger sample size, which is always nice because you want as much outreach as possible. As long as it's random, we're okay with that. So the upshot is that a lower percentage of people said it's not treated, and a higher percentage said they're not sure, or they incorrectly said it was treated. And this is an example of how the unsure has increased, and I believe partly because of the methodology. And so I suspect that there's a consistency across the last two surveys in terms of awareness. Not much has changed as to whether they're aware. And I should tell you that I do this kind of research throughout California, and in systems where they're not connected, this is often a major problem. There's a lack of awareness of the system.
Would you prefer we hold questions till the end?
Whatever you'd like.
I just had a very quick question.
I'm here for you.
Relative to the methodology.
Yes.
How did they access the URL?
We sent out an invitation from, I believe, the city manager, and each individual who received it was asked. We told them there's an independent firm that was hired. Well, the city manager did, and there was a logo, and then they each got their own unique URL, and it could only be used once. So it wasn't a survey where sometimes you'll get it from a city where you can go back 100 times. So this is a unique individual. Is that sure? Happy to. And just keep them coming. We asked them, would you say that the material on the street that's washed into the storm drains are a major source of pollution in the city's creeks, beaches, or is it minor or not a source at all? And you could see on the left-hand side panel the results in 2013 when it was first asked. 88% said a major or minor, with 55% saying a major. In 2018, not a major difference in terms of response. Still at least 8 and 10 said a major or minor. 50%, so 1 and 2 said major, but notice the not sure has increased. So I suspect the perceptions are very close to what they were previously. And then we asked them, do you recall seeing or hearing any information in the last few years about preventing pollution from getting into the storm drains? We know that there's been a concerted effort by the city to communicate. We also know that there are other agencies, be it the county agency, and also there's free media, news stories about stormwater. So in 2018, 54% said that they had heard something about this, consistent with the 2013 numbers. And then among the people who said they had heard something, read or seen something, we asked them, where did you see or hear? So we're asking for a location. And a little bit more than a quarter said television, and 11% said the news. Now that could be, of course, on television, or it could be written form. They weren't specific. And the interviewers are trained not to have this conversation back and forth, but just to take down what the individual said. This was all in their own words. And then 11% said signs and posters. If you look through the individual items, you'll see that most of these items are places where the Creeks Division communicate. Television, signs or posters, radio, online, email, through the water bills and the flyers. So much of it was captured in these individual items. And then we said, again, among the people who had said they'd seen, heard, or something about it, we said, well, what did you learn? And close to a quarter, or at least 2 in 10, said that everything goes into the ocean, pollution in general into the ocean, which is a major message. So it's good that they actually, in their own words, capture that. Do not dump oil, do not wash cars on streets, oil goes into the ocean. 12%, do not throw garbage, do not dump waste. So these are consistent with the kinds of messages that the Creek Division communicates. So that's an indication that that this kind of information is getting through to people. And again, among the people who had seen or heard something, we said, had this got you to make a change in your behavior with respect to your polluting the creeks and the beaches and the coastal waters? 20% said it had. 60% said they had already taken some kind of action. And this could be a result possibly of previous years where there was communications, or they could actually take action for different reasons, but they just happened to, this was a benefit for having taken some action. So 2 in 10 said they had taken some action. Among the folks who had said they had taken some action, we said again in their own words, and this is grouped responses, what have you done? And the largest response was they took their car to a car wash. They're washing car on their lawn, not on the street or the driveway. That's 40%. Now that's 40% of 152, not of the original sample size, because it's a smaller sample. A quarter of them said they picked up litter, stopped littering, polluting in general, which was 2 in 10, and used less water, conserved water. We then gave them a list of items that could be, we typically see going into the streets and the storm drains. We said on a scale of 1 to 5, where 1 is not at all a serious problem and 5 is a very serious problem, how serious a problem is this item going into the storm drains? The red is the very serious problem. That's the 5. The lighter sort of pinkish red is somewhat serious, and I've aggregated the total serious on the right-hand side. That would be the 5 and the 4. And you could see we have a fair number of items that are considered to be serious, and leading the way is trash and litter, such as fast food wrappers. Now, 59% said very serious, and if you drop down to the automotive fluids, such as motor oil or antifreeze, you could see there's an uptick in the intensity at 68% of very serious. And then as we go down, paint and lawn or garden fertilizer like Miracle-Gro are top examples. And then comparison where questions were asked across years, you could see primarily most of the items have gone down relative to 2013, but trash and litter such as fast food wrappers has gone up 5%, so above the margin of error. And then paint has gone down, as you could see, 9 points from the previous year. And then I'm going to pass this over to my colleague.
So one of the other things that we wanted to test in our survey were behaviors and perceptions of littering and pollution in general. And one of the things that we did is that we started to ask people if they had used pesticides, herbicides, or fertilizer in their lawn or in their garden, or anywhere else on their property in the last year or so. And this question was asked only of individuals who responded that they themselves actually had a garden that they tended to, or that they hired a gardener to tend to. So you'll see here that the number is lower than the total number of the people that we actually interviewed. That's because we excluded the people who either live in apartment complex or who simply just don't have a garden or have access to their garden. And so what we see here between 2013 and 2018 is that the percentage of people who responded that they do use these types of chemicals has pretty much stayed the same. There's only been a small reduction from 29% in 2013 to 26% in 2018. What we do see, however, is an increase in the percentage of individuals who said that they were simply unsure. And this could be in part due to the methodology that Richard was referring to earlier. It could also be in part that individuals are simply just not aware of the type of chemicals and products that they're using in their garden, and they're just not aware of the problems that those items might be causing. So we also asked them about the various actions that people may take in order to avoid pollution in the area. We asked them how often does this apply to them, if this is something that they do or if it's something that they don't do. We also gave them an option to say whether it's something that doesn't apply to them. And the item that we see that consistently ranks higher in the last 2 years is that people continue to take their cars to the car wash rather than washing it at home. That seems to be a message that has hit home, for lack of a better term. We also see that picking up litter in the street has stayed pretty consistent. It's gone up a couple of percentage points from 73% in 2013 to 79% in 2018. Picking up dog waste has also gone up a little bit from 49% in 2013 to 51% in 2018. And reducing the use of herbicides, pesticides, and fertilizers, that has gone down a couple of points, not too significantly. And the one thing I want to reiterate here is in the last 2 items, we have 35% in 2018 that responded that does not apply or they don't recall, and 50% under reduce the use of pesticides and herbicides. Again, these are individuals that may not necessarily have a dog or may not have access to a garden, along with a percentage of individuals who just simply may not recall. So one of the things that we also did was try to ask them, what are the things that motivate people the most to try to prevent pollutions in the creeks and the oceans in the area? And we see that the trend kind of continues between 2013 and 2018. We see that the top item, the one thing that motivates the most people tends to be knowing that their actions will help protect the environment. All the other items, knowing that your action will protect the health of children who swim in the ocean, knowing that you may be cited and fined for municipal code violations, and knowing that your neighbors are taking the same action to prevent pollution, have pretty much stayed the same throughout between the 2 years. However, the other item that we do see a change in is the percentage of people who say that all of these impact them equally. So in 2013, we see that only 18% said all of these items impacted their decision to avoid pollution. In 2018, we see that number go up to 32%. And then we also wanted to see where residents believe that pollution is coming from. We asked them if they believe that the bigger source of pollution in Santa Barbara's creeks and oceans are coming from local businesses or if they're coming from residents like themselves. And here we see that there's actually been a switch in the trend from 2008. So in 2008, we see that most individuals thought that residents such as themselves were the main source of pollution, were a bigger source of pollution than businesses. In 2013, we see that the idea is more split. So 41% say that businesses are the larger source. 37% believe that it's residents such as themselves, and so there's not a huge difference between those two numbers. In 2018, however, we see that there's a shift. We see more people are now saying that businesses are the larger sources of pollution versus only 20% who believe that it's residents. We also see, again, an increase in the percentage of people who are saying that it's equal. So this means that there is a significant number of people who believe that it's not just one source or another. Pollution is coming from various sources. So we also asked individuals who they believe is responsible for keeping the creeks free of pollution in the area. And here we see that, again, it's following up with what we've been seeing, that people tend to believe that it's a combination of things. So only 10% of the respondents indicated that it's the city, 3% believe that it's the county's responsibility, 2% say that it's property owners along the creeks, 30% believe that it's all residents in the community, and 45%, the largest percentage out of all these categories, indicated that it's a combination of all these items. So overall, what this tells us is that people tend to see this as a problem that's not just from one source, nor is there just one solution. Residents tend to believe that this is a joint effort, but also it tells us that a lot of individuals are simply just not aware of all the facts in the area. So one of the other things that we wanted to test were the changes in perceptions of the water quality in beaches and creeks in the area. And we started off by asking individuals how, if they have visited their local beaches and their local creeks in the last 2 years or so. And so as you can tell, people here love their beaches. 95% have been to a local beach in the last 2 years or so. Local creeks, it's slightly lower at 70%, but it's still, they're still frequented fairly often. So the next thing that we asked them was if they believe that the water in the Santa Barbara beaches have become more polluted in the last years. If we asked them if they believe they're more polluted or less polluted, or have stayed more or less the same. And what we see is that there hasn't been a huge difference in the total percentage of individuals who say that it has become more polluted. So in 2013, we have an aggregated total of 39% saying that beaches were more polluted then than they were a few years prior. In 2018, we see that it's 40%. However, what we do see an increase in is in the intensity. So in 2013, we only had 14% individuals saying that that the water quality is more polluted, much more polluted than it had been in previous years. That number that percentage goes up to 20% in 2018. The other thing that we see, the people who believe that the water quality is somewhat less polluted or much less polluted. So in total, 15% in 2013 said that it was less polluted. That number goes a little bit down. In 2018, only 8% of the population said that it was less polluted. The other thing that we see here is an increase in the individuals who simply say that they don't know. Again, this could be attributed to the difference in the methodology that we used, as well as reiterating the fact that a lot of individuals just don't feel like they don't have enough information to be able to make that decision. So the next thing that we did is we asked individuals who did say they responded that the beaches were either much more or somewhat more polluted than they were in previous years, and we asked them, why do they say that? And the one thing that I want to point out here is the percentage of individuals who are referring back to the natural disasters that have happened in the area. So 21% indicated that it was due to mudslides in the water. We had 12% saying that it was because of the fires. Another 12% said that it was because of oil spills in the water. I do want to remind that when we did this interview, it was only a couple of months after the mudslides and the fires that happened in the neighboring areas. So this is something that may still have been current in people's minds. But things such as like oil spills, I believe it was a couple of years since it's last happened. So it's one of those things where once people see it happening, it tends to stay in their mind. The other things that people found, or other reasons why people found that that the ocean water quality had become more polluted in the last couple of years, they indicated that there had been floating trash in the water. 16% said that they have seen it or they have smelled it. 13% say that there's just been an increase in population. There's just too many people and too many tourists in the area, as well as a couple of other items listed down here. So lastly, one of the items that we also wanted to test here is people's willingness and favorability for different projects and restoration efforts and different policies that the city might be interested in implementing to help just creek restoration and to lessen pollution overall. And one of the things that we asked people first was we asked homeowners, so people who actually have the capability of changing the area where they live, how likely they would be to remove paved areas to improve the water quality and wildlife. And when we just asked it just as it is, how likely would you be willing to do this if you knew that it would help restore the creek's health and the wildlife habitats in the area? And we see that 45% in total said that they would be either very likely or somewhat likely. So 21% said very likely, 24% somewhat likely. 18% said that they weren't too likely, and 21% that said that they were not at all likely. And then an additional 12% of these individuals, of these homeowners, indicated that they don't really have paved areas at home, so it wouldn't really apply to them. So what we did then is we asked them what was the likelihood of them doing this type of project if there was a city-sponsored program that could help financially to do these projects at home. And what we see is that there's a pretty significant increase in the people who say that they would be more likely. So it goes from 45 without any mention of the city-sponsored program to 55% with city-sponsored program. The other thing that we see is also the intensity of how likely they would be able to do it. We see 21% very likely without the city sponsorship, 30% very likely with the city sponsorship. The last thing I want to mention on this slide is also looking at the percentage of individuals who say that they're not likely. That percentage actually doesn't change regardless of which option it is. So that indicates to us that there is a segment of the population that is just unfortunately simply not interested in doing this. We also tested a couple of different policies that could be implemented, and we asked individuals how favorable, how strongly they would favor doing these types of policies, implementing these policies in the city. And what we have here, we give them the option. They can either say that it was strongly favorable, which is in dark blue, somewhat favorable in the light blue, somewhat opposed in the pinkish red, and strongly opposed in the dark red. And you'll see here that we aggregated the total percentages of people who found it favorable and the percentage of people who found it that they were opposed to it. The number one item was citing and finding people caught littering or not picking up after the dog. So 92% of our respondents indicated that they would favor implementing this policy. Replacing paved areas with surfaces that allow rain to soak into the ground was at 79%. Removing invasive non-native plants to public property and replacing them with native plants was at 77%. Enacting policies that require buffer zones between creeks and new buildings at 76%, and purchasing property alongside creeks to protect it from pollution development at 63%.
So, in conclusion, sorry. Thanks. Should know this by now. I'm just going to sort of hit the high points of what we've shown you. So I'll just remind you that this is a different methodology than previous years, and therefore the larger percentages of those who say they don't know or are unsure or have chosen a combination of answers in an effort to, where we had an effort to provide a forced choice, partly explains the difference. Overall, there's an increase in respondents who seem unfamiliar with the storm drain system, though again, it could be attributed to the methodology of the survey. Majority of respondents recall seeing, hearing, or reading information about preventing storm drain pollution. The most frequently mentioned source was television. As a result of seeing or hearing such information, 2 in 10 respondents changed their behavior. 6 in 10 said they had already changed it, and the biggest change was in the fact that they washed their car. Respondents identified trash and litter, automotive fluids, and paint as the most serious storm drain pollutant in the city. Among respondents with gardens, only a little more than a quarter recalled using pesticide, herbicide, or fertilizer on their property, similar results to 2013. Residents are more motivated to take action to protect the environment, although a third are motivated by a combination of different factors, including protecting children, fine, or because their neighbors are acting in such a manner. And then finally, nearly half of all respondents believe that the local government, property owners, all residents. So in other words, we're all responsible in some way for this. 4 in 10 respondents believe that water in Santa Barbara beaches are more polluted over the last few years. This trend has followed since 2013. The biggest contributors are seen as the mudslides and floating trash in the water. While only 45% homeowners would consider removing paved area to help with local water quality, the willingness increases to 55% after they find out there might be city-sponsored financial help. And 7 in 10 respondents strongly support citing and finding people caught in littering. But the good news is there are a lot of policies that the city is considering, and all of them are supported by a majority of residents. And we'll be happy to answer any questions.
I'm wondering a little bit about the demographic effect, just thinking about the paint that was in the creek in Rancho Bernardo. And, that's a fairly affluent area. Yet there was a lot of purple paint in one of the creeks there about a month ago, something like that. One might expect that in an affluent area like that, better educated people might know better, but apparently not. How did this affect the demographics when you're sampling? Your sample size is about 1,500 individuals. Did
Right.
you spread out the demographics
Yeah,
when you did this
it's
survey?
representative across the city, so they would make up presumably the appropriate proportion of all city residents. So if you could tell me what percentage of the population lives in that area, that would give you a sense of the response. But remember, this survey was taken last year, and so if the purple paint was within the last month, we would not have captured that. If I understood your question, that was what you had mentioned. So if I didn't understand it, I apologize.
No, Rancho Bernardo is in a completely different area in San Diego
Yeah.
County. It was just using it as an
I
example.
see. Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Well, you had mentioned the purple paint from last. Did you say last month?
It was about
Okay.
a month ago
Right.
down in San Diego.
Oh, Dan. Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry. Okay. Not familiar with that.
That was just by way
Better.
of example.
Yeah. But okay. Well, then I will answer your question again in general. It's representative of all the communities proportionally in the city. So you'll be able to identify the wealthy areas and non-wealthy areas, and they all would contribute their proportion to these responses. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does.
Okay.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Before I ask you both what you thought the most surprising finding was in last year's survey, I also want to see if our City Council liaison, Kristen Sneddon, who's in the audience, had a question. So you could go before me or... Oh, okay. Thank you so much. What was the single most surprising finding that you had, aside from the fact that the public was confused about the Plains oil spill and the debris flow and the Thomas fire? What one thing really surprised you?
Well, I guess I'll start. I have to be honest, I actually am not surprised about any of these results. I've been doing these kinds of surveys for a very long time. As I mentioned earlier, there's generally a low awareness about the stormwater system. People generally don't want to take sole responsibility for their actions, so they like to contribute. They like to spread it around, say, yeah, well, it might be some of us, but it's business, it's city, it's government. All these things sort of seemed consistent with what I'm seeing in other places. And you took away the only thing that I would have said, which is there was that recognition of the events that happened around the time just before the survey happened, and that's sort of the standout thing for me, which I would assume that if we were to do the survey today, those numbers would have decreased because we're living in a society where people shift from one issue to the other very quickly, and they forget quickly. So that number might have been somewhat higher than previous years, but I suspect lower than what we'll see. And I know you have a mandate to do this in another 3 or 4 years. I think unless something dramatically happens again, that number will have reduced dramatically. Is there anything else?
No, I just wanted to reiterate that last part. It is something that, like Richard was mentioning, with so much information that shifts all the time, it is interesting to see that the members of the community here really take to heart, even though a lot of the disaster did not strike Santa Barbara directly.
And just to follow up, I urge us not to conflate the debris flows and the outcomes of that with our education program. That those are two certainly different natural processes. And I'm actually even a bit concerned that it was even one of the choices because it's not pollution, or, oh, it was
It was
offered.
open-ended. So
Oh,
it's in the minds of your resident.
Oh, okay.
And the fact that you're suggesting that we shouldn't conflate it suggests
Conflate, yeah.
that suggests that's an educational moment in and of itself.
Right, right. And certainly a responsibility that the county bears for a lot of the press that may be related to the things happening along the beach relative to the debris flow materials. So I just want to make sure we don't go overboard on that, on a natural process and make it something else.
Was online, was that question like a fill in the blank?
Yes.
So they just,
Yeah,
Yes,
yes, that's right. In both cases, in your own words, can you tell me X? And then we took the responses, we grouped them together because we had over 1,000 responses. So we grouped them together in a meaningful way, and that happened to be one of the responses.
I guess I have one more question just for you. Are there any, like, seeing these results, are there any, like, actions that are on the top of your mind for us moving forward?
I think just kind of a back to basics approach, just really kind of hitting, only rain down the drain, that these two systems are separate, anything that flows into the storm drain. So I think that's what we're going to kind of go back to hitting on that.
I had the same question, and because Richard and Laura do these types of surveys around the state of California, around coastal California, my question was directed to them, since we're going to use this data and we have our education outreach subcommittee is going to get back to work and try to formulate some messages and some outreach and education efforts that will try to move the needle. Whether you guys have actually seen over the years some type of activity on behalf of the local government or through social media or something that has been able to move the needle on these types of water quality related issues.
Well, I partly think perseverance is always helpful. I have seen, I was involved, I don't know if you're familiar with Measure W in LA County, which was a stormwater measure that was passed, largest stormwater measure in the U.S. history just in 2018. I started work on that in 2006, and the awareness of stormwater runoff dramatically increased from that time. I know it was a long time, 12 years, but they got there. And so I think part of it is messaging is a key. The survey identifies that one of the motivating factors is the environment. And I think in this community, more so than in most, that's a sellable message. And it was clear, certainly from the survey, but I'm very aware of this community, and it's ahead of the curve in terms of this kind of issue. And I just have to look at a committee for creek restoration and in a division to know that that's the case. So I think, linking some of the findings to the messaging, to hone the messaging, would probably be a good thing. The thing that, of course, I don't set policy for the city, but I was excited to see that there was a lot of support for many of the policies that were being considered, and that may be something that you may want to move forward on. Now, if do you mind if I go back to a slide for just 1 minute? Because I wanted to point out, if I can find the, oh, sorry. All right, do you know the policy one? Okay, great. All right, so I actually wanted to start with this one, which is the removing paved areas. So we had 45% that said likely before we mentioned potential financial incentive, and then 55 after. Now, in reality, I don't look at the total likely. I look at the very likely. Those are the only people you're going to get. You will get, and then you'll get a fraction of those people. But if you're going to offer, and I don't know that this is to be the case, but if you're going to offer financial incentives, you're only going to have a certain pot of money. And if it was 30% of homeowners that had concrete that all came to you, you'd run out of money really quickly. And I've seen that with respect to changing turf into California-friendly plants. So I know that's the case. So even if you got a few percentage points from that I would think would be an initial success. So I would be considering some of these policies. I imagine we wouldn't have been asked to test them if they weren't at least being considered. So I think that's a good place to go as well. So it's not only the education part, it's instituting incentives and policies that people will be moving to enact. Does that help? All right.
I have one final thought from my perspective. Probably the preeminent work in water quality has been done up in Lake Tahoe, and I had the fortune of spending 2 decades living there. They have a bi-state agency called the Tahoe Regional Planning Agency that is a governmental entity that is very focused on not only regulatory action and punitive action, but more to the point, education and outreach and information. And I would urge staff to maybe take a field trip to arrange. No, I mean this in all seriousness. We should not have to reinvent the wheel. And there's just incredible work being done up there. And for staff to see it firsthand and to understand the education outreach and the fact that those of us who have had the honor of living up there live it and breathe it and know it is I think something maybe we could find some parts that might be adaptable here. So just a thought.
Okay, thank you, everyone, if that's all.
Thank you for that, Liz, Richard, and Laura. We appreciate that presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. The next item is the fiscal year 2020 budget, I believe.
I'm just going to get set up here.
Okay.
Yes, it's right here. Ready to go. Okay, thank you, Madam Chair, committee members.
Thanks, Cameron.
My name's Cameron Benson. I'm the Creeks Division Manager, and I'm going to be presenting to you tonight the proposed budget for the Creeks Division for fiscal years 2020 and 2021. I wanted to start off by talking a little bit about the city's budget process. Several of you have gotten through a lot of these. Lee, I think this is probably the 13th year you've done this just with the Creeks Division budget, and probably many before that. So bear with me while we talk about explain our process a little bit. The city does a 2-year budget document, and then we'll come back and revisit the second year. So for tonight, I'm going to focus on the first year of that 2-year budget. Our process is to start with the budget subcommittee. We met back on March 11th. We went through in detail, line by line, the proposed Creeks Division budget, what we were looking at last year, what we looked at, how we were looking in the current year, and then looking forward over the next 2 years. We're here tonight for a recommendation from the committee to the Parks and Recreation Commission and to City Council as to the proposed budget. The City Council will be presented with the entire city budget next week, on Tuesday. I will be at the Parks and Recreation Commission next Wednesday to forward your recommendation and present to the commission the Creeks Division budget as part of the overall Parks and Recreation departmental budget. And then I will be at the City Council on May 8th presenting the Creeks Division budget again as part of the Parks and Recreation department budget. City Council makes its final budget decisions in June. A little bit about the Creeks Fund. The Creeks Fund is a special fund. It was created by the voters of the city of Santa Barbara through Measure B back in 2000, which created the special fund. It's funded by a 2% hotel bed tax, and the use of the funding for Measure B is restricted for uses to improve the quality of stormwater and other surface waters and to carry out creek restoration improvements. I think it's important to mention at that point that almost all of our funding comes through Measure B. The Creeks Division receives no general fund money at all. Now, to talk a little bit about our numbers, I'll start with the revenue. We are looking at a small increase being forecast by the Finance Department for the Measure B funds in the next fiscal year, just about $50,000. A small increase in our interest income as well. So overall, we're looking at about a $60,000 increase in revenue. So basically flat for the next year, and then a slightly larger increase projected for FY21, but that will continues to be revised as we're going forward. One thing I wanted to mention as we're talking about revenue is the Creeks Division is very aggressive in going after grant funding to leverage our Measure B dollars. You don't see any line items here for grant funding. It's all the grants that we're going for are very, very competitive, and just to be on the safe side, we don't, even when we know we're going to be applying for something, we don't budget it into our revenue until we have it. I'll talk a little bit more about grants and our reserves and so forth later. Our proposed expenditures for the next 2 years are also relatively flat. When you look at those at the totals down at the bottom, you actually see our number from the current year, which is the first column, FY19. That's what we're in now. Drop going into FY20, and then come up about even in FY21. So what that drop is largely a drop in the capital program transfer in the coming year. This committee reviewed and recommended a capital improvement program back at our October meeting. That's a big chunk of our budget. It's actually the largest portion of our budget goes into our capital program. You do see some increases built in here in salaries and benefits for the next year. Basically flat on supplies and services. That's everything from our water quality lab sampling contracts to trash cleanup to our restoration project maintenance. Other things are flat. Street sweeping, I'll talk a little more about that in a minute. But the big difference really is a $350,000 drop in our capital transfer, and you see that just reflected in the bottom line here in what's being proposed. This is a pie chart that kind of breaks down our actually this should be fiscal year 2020 budget by categories, and as you can see, again, our capital improvement program is the largest portion of our budget at 35%, salaries and benefits at 30%, and then our supplies and professional services at 24% make up the bulk of the Creeks Division budget. Just on the salaries and benefits thing, I should mention we have just under 9 full-time equivalent employees, and it's been stable at that for several years now. So we haven't been growing our staff. We tend to use a model where we keep a core staff, and then we contract work as we have specific projects that we're taking on, and that's a lot of what this is here, as well as our capital program. Our FY 2020 proposed operating budget. Now, this just focuses just in on our operating, not our capital budget. This is a breakdown. Years ago, the Creeks Advisory Committee had directed staff in conjunction with what the committee believed the voters were looking for with Measure B, and really wanted us to kind of keep the spending on a focus of approximately 50% for water quality, 25% creek restoration, and 25% community outreach. And we keep year to year pretty close to those goals. It does change, but only a few percent usually. There is also overlap between these categories. Obviously, the community outreach is all about water quality and creek restoration. And I have been asked before why 25% of our budget for community outreach, and tonight's a perfect night to talk about that, because when you talk about surface water quality problems or creek and ocean water quality problems, Santa Barbara, like most cities, has the number one pollution problem is non-point source runoff or urban runoff pollution, and that really is something that everybody's a part of. So if we're going to have success in moving the needle and improving water quality, we need everybody to know that that they're a part of the problem. They can be part of the solution, and so it's a huge and important part of our water quality improvement programs. Again, some of the key issues in the budget this year: projected Measure B revenue increase of about $50,000, a fairly significant decrease in our capital improvement program transfer for this year. I want to come back to street sweeping. Our transfer from reserves. We often use our reserve to kind of balance out to our budget. This is a fairly balanced budget. We're looking at transferring just under $70,000 from reserve to balance the budget. In past years, for example, last year we transferred $467,000. So it's and a lot of that goes into our capital program. And because our capital programs dropped down this year, we have a smaller number. And that's partly because we pulled money out of our reserve to acquire a property this year, so our reserve balance is smaller, so we're looking at a smaller budget. I wanted to talk a little bit about street sweeping. I'd passed out to everyone a copy of the letter that the committee sent to the Parks and Recreation Commission and to City Council last year. And there was a focus in the letter from the committee on the street sweeping transfer, and so I just wanted to bring that up to let you know that staff did follow up on the committee's requests in the letter, and specifically a direction that the committee requested last year for the Creeks Division, Police Department, and Streets Division staff to conduct a review of the street sweeping program to ensure the greatest water quality benefit from Measure B funding. And the direction from the committee was very specific, including a detailed examination of parking ticket revenues from the street sweeping program, to look at the number of parking enforcement officers working within the residential street sweeping program, and so forth. So I wanted to let the committee know that staff from all three divisions and departments did get together and meet. The question from the committee was, Measure B is supposed to be making up the difference in this residential street sweeping program between the cost of running that program and the revenues that were coming in through the parking enforcement in that program. And So for the current year, that difference was pegged to be $190,000. And when we actually got in and looked at it, what we found was that if you count all of the revenues that come in from the parking tickets from the street sweeping program, including the penalties for people who are late in paying their tickets, there was sufficient revenue to cover the cost, excuse me, of the program. To this issue of how many parking enforcement officers were being paid through the program and how many hours, we did find that more parking enforcement hours were being paid for through the program than the program was receiving. So that number has been reduced, and the residential street sweeping program is now being charged a lesser rate for the parking enforcement officer costs. However, the city administrator and the finance director looked at the results from that staff analysis and made a determination to continue to use Measure B funding for the residential street sweeping program in the amount, in a fixed amount. It's no longer looking at making up the difference. It's just a fixed amount of $190,000 per year there's a CPI type of adjustment. So this is proposed for, it's $190,000 in the current year. It's proposed for $190,000 next year, and then it will go up, I think, 2%, so $3,800 in FY21. So the $190,000 is what is proposed in the FY20 budget. And I just wanted to fill you in on all that background because you did have very specific, detailed comments about this last year, and I wanted to let you know that there was follow-up as a result of that. And so that's that. Yes?
Ask a question about that. And yet, just so that I'm clear, the street sweeping reserve fund is still in the black. There is still a reserve fund that theoretically could cover this $190,000 for the next several years. Is that a fair?
Madam Chair, Dr. Gaskin, the street sweeping, there was a street sweeping reserve fund. Most of the balance of that fund was taken out back during the recession period to keep the city operating, and so I don't really think that there is a reserve fund. If there is, it's a very small amount of money at this point. One thing I will point out is I've been talking about the residential street sweeping program. So the street sweeping program, there's a commercial component to it and a residential component to it, and the part that Measure B has been involved in has been the residential component historically, and that's because the funding guidelines for Measure B expressly state that the Measure B funds are not supposed to be used for a program that was already existing in the city at the time Measure B was passed. And so the city already had a commercial street sweeping program in place, and the Measure B funds were used to expand that program.
Can I ask a quick question of clarification? The last point, and kind of to the point you just mentioned about the $1 million that was in the reserves being used to balance the budget, I totally understand that, but it was asking whether or not those reserve funds included Measure B funds. Was there ever an answer to that question?
Madam Chair and Ms. Martinez, we did not.
Or is it even able to be ascertained?
We didn't get an answer to that question.
Okay.
Interesting. So moving on to some of the things that are kind of the meat of what we do and some of the budget related items. This is basically our water quality lab work components of our budget. We have our water quality lab analysis. We do microbial source tracking, which is our DNA-based water quality research. We do a macroinvertebrate field study. That's kind of the health of aquatic organisms and in our creeks. And the one thing I wanted to point out was we do have some expanded water quality monitoring, and where we're specifically looking at stormwater BMP effectiveness. So as our stormwater program matures and stormwater BMPs are being installed on private property as well as public property, we have more and more of those kind of BMPs that are available for us to do testing on. And so we've increased our budget slightly for that for 2020. It was $50,000. We've increased it to $75,000. And we're proposing that for FY20 and 21 to gather more data on what our most effective and efficient stormwater BMPs are. Some other continuing programs. Yes, we spend $180,000 picking up trash out of the creeks and off the beaches in Santa Barbara every year. And we generally collect somewhere around the order of 55 tons of trash off the creeks and off the beaches and out of the creeks every year. And that's in addition to the amount and volume of waste that's collected through the street sweeping program. Our creek restoration project maintenance, as we do more of those projects, our costs are going up. So our proposed restoration project maintenance for FY20 is $200,000. One thing I will say about that, though, compared to other types of hard structure maintenance is, with creek restoration projects, we have a lot of maintenance up front. We have it's mostly weeding to allow the native plants to become established. Once they're established and they outcompete the weeds, our weeding costs go down. So we have a lot more projects, but the individual cost per project, you'll see it generally drops from year to year. We have a youth watershed education program where we reach over 3,000 students at school in Santa Barbara. It's a voluntary program, so we're contacted by teachers, and we contract with Explore Ecology to do in-classroom education as well as field trips to creeks and estuary and the Watershed Resource Center at Hendry's Beach. And again, we talked a lot about outreach tonight. We have TV and radio PSA campaigns. We've had award-winning campaigns. We even won an Emmy Award one year for one of our water quality PSAs. So we actually have a new campaign going out now on television and radio. I just saw, it was incredible. I got to watch a Dodger game on ESPN the other night, which is a rare occurrence, and saw one of the Creeks Division ads on a Dodger game. So that was a big deal for me. One thing I want to point out here is we are shifting more money into our kind of electronic advertising. We're finding from our public opinion surveys that's what seems to be reaching people. So our print advertising dollars are going down, and we're actually, when we say electronic, it's TV, radio, it's also online advertising. So those could be Facebook ads and things like that as well. You guys are well aware of our capital program. We spend a lot of time talking about a whole meeting in October. So I know you know these projects. You've already reviewed these numbers and approved them. I would like to just mention a few of these projects because they're going to be a big deal in the next year. One is in the stormwater treatment retrofit projects. This is where we've done permeable paver pilot projects around town. This year, in the coming year, we hope to construct a project that it will be a stormwater treatment retrofit in Bonnet Park over on the west side, and we're basically going to be capturing 6 acres of hardscape, the stormwater runoff from 6 acres of hardscape that will be able to infiltrate underneath the playing field at Bonnet Park. And so it should be a pretty cool demonstration project and a great partnership with with the Parks Division.
Yeah, I just want to make a comment here. That is in conjunction with a larger project at the park to do a number of other upgrades to amenities.
Correct. So what we're doing is utilizing this opportunity. The Parks Division is doing some significant improvements at Bonnet Park, and so we teamed up with them, and Creeks Division. This is one of the things with Measure B is it's challenging because we're trying to keep be clear about the dollars being spent and so forth, and so this is a new opportunity for us to kind of work together, and so we've got these park improvements, and then the things that we're building are all underground, so they
Yeah, I
won't
just
be
think
seen,
it makes
but it's
a lot of sense to do it at the same time, and they're doing a project, you guys want to get in on a project, everything's going to be torn up anyways. It's a great, I think, use of resources. And I think there's been like one or two other examples, but I think hopefully going forward that could be more the norm as we are upgrading infrastructure, adding in these water quality elements. Yeah.
Yes, thank you. And we also are looking for we're working with the Public Works Department on a lot of opportunities to do the same thing. A couple other ones real quick. I mentioned before an acquisition. We're in escrow to purchase about 5.5 acres along Arroyo Burro in the Hidden Valley neighborhood at the end of Palermo Drive, and that will be a location of a future restoration project. And we will we're on track to close escrow on that project at the end of October of this year. And the reason we did such a long escrow on it was we're trying to use that opportunity to secure some grant funding to do the acquisition. And we have a very nice landowner who was willing to give us a long time to try to do that. And then lastly, just because it's so visible and a big deal, is a quick update on the Andre Clark Bird Refuge. The bird refuge has had serious water quality problems and stink problems and habitat problems since it was first dammed up back in the late 20s, and we're working on a project. It is kind of incremental improvements, but we're working on a project and we're moving that forward. We're moving through the process of final design for some steps, and we're at the point within the next month where we'll be submitting permit applications to the more than a half dozen agencies, natural resource protection agencies primarily, to get permits to move forward with our project. And by putting this amount of funding in, we anticipate that by the time we receive those permits, we'll have banked enough funds to move forward and construct the project. So we'll be ready to go. I mentioned our aggressive pursuit of grants. This is just focusing on our capital improvement program funding, and this goes back several years. And what you're seeing here is this blue color is the Measure B funds that have been used for our capital program, and the green is the grant funding that we've been able to leverage. You can see that in several years we received more in grant funding than we actually used in Measure B funds for our capital program. Some years, looking back at this FY13, we received more grant funding than we actually received in Measure B funding in total, including our operating and capital funds. Some years we barely got anything, but we got something. And then I can report this is the current fiscal year, and what this is showing, I was just notified about a week ago that we were successful with one of our grant applications for that acquisition. So this is reflecting a $500,000 grant from the state of California, the River Parkways program, and we're working out the grant agreement, which I expect to have finished by the end of the year, which is by the end of the fiscal year, which is our threshold for inclusion in this chart. I do have another grant, $500,000 grant pending for that same project, and I will be submitting another $300,000 grant application for that project before the end of this month. So, just really successful, at least in my view, looking at the Creeks Division as a program. I mean, essentially, since our first year, we received over $20 million in grant funding. So we're still on a track of over $1 million a year coming into the city in grant funds through this program, which is just tremendous to me. The staff works really, really hard on that, and I'm super proud of all of them for it. Unappropriated reserves. So this is important. This is our Creeks, just the Creeks Fund reserves. The committee has requested that we aim for a balance in our reserve of $3 million, which was really set a while back as, we want to have money to be able to act on two good-sized projects, and we want to have the money in the bank to do it if an opportunity comes up, or we have an opportunity to leverage some funds and get some grant funds in for a project, or to have the reserves if we hit hard economic times, as we did a few years ago. And so our target is the $3 million reserve. At the end of this year, we're looking at roughly $2 million reserve, and the reason is, during the middle of this fiscal year, that property, we had an opportunity to purchase that property, so we took up $1.2 million out of the reserve and put it into an account to buy that property. We're also taking money out to balance our budget this year, but because we're doing that acquisition, we transferred the money out, I'm counting this back in, so as we get that grant funding, that's coming back in and helping us to replenish the reserve. So if we're successful with those other grants, we'll be right back on target. If we're not, we'll be working our way back there, and we'll look at that and think about that as we prepare our capital program for next year. So we're shy of our target. We're projecting to be shy of our target. We'll see what happens with the grants, and the committee can decide tonight whether you're all okay with that for now, and we can adjust next year if we have to. And with that, I'll conclude. And by the way, we got Earth Day coming up in a couple of weekends, and I think Liz will probably have our cutout so you can get your picture taken as the Creekman cartoon cover. So, thank you.
Cameron, I just have a quick question about your funding, which I think is amazing that you're able to get that much funding for your program. It's nice to offset so much. Do most of your funds come from Prop 1?
Madam Chair, the grant that I'm applying for this month is a Prop 1 grant. The grant funding that we received last year for the Arroyo Borough Open Space, I believe we had two grants. I believe both of those were from Prop 1. But there have been, this is going back to I mean, the $20 million figure goes back to 2002, which around that time was Prop 12 and 13, which was a parks and water bond. So a lot of those are state bond, voter-approved bond funds that were set up for natural resource protection, restoration, and water quality improvement. And so, but some of the grant, I mean, we look to federal, state, and local grant fund sources, including private foundation grant fund sources, which we've received over the years as well.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Benson. Very good report. I feel very privileged I was able to be with the chair and Ms. Owens several weeks ago, where we actually went over line by line the budget proposal for 2020, 2021. And so I was wondering, Madam Chair, just for the sake of convivial conversation, would you be willing to accept a motion to endorse the staff budget proposal, and if approved, to forward it both to the City Parks and Recs Commission and on to the City Council as part of this year's budget process?
Yes, I would.
Yeah, that would be what I would move, just to get the conversation going.
Second.
Okay, so those in favor of the, oh, okay. Okay, so. Any questions?
I had a comment, and I hope it gets transmitted to City Council. I find your leadership and your staff's commitment to be extraordinary. It's clear through the budget. The budget speaks to the citizens of this city in a way that really puts kind of meat on the bones. And it says to me, stewardship every which way you turn. From your very careful expenditure and plans with Measure B, through you've talked about the leveraging of external grants, to just a very thoughtful, mindful, and strategic way in which, clearly with your leadership and your staff and the advisement of this committee, truly to be commended. And I want to say that in public and certainly in front of our liaison.
Yeah, I would certainly second those comments, and I hope Mrs. Sneddon is able at an appropriate time to carry them back to the full City Council.
We need to vote on the motion.
Those in favor of the budget?
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? Okay.
Unanimous.
Budget is passed for 2020. Okay.
Madam Chair, with reference to the rapid approach of Easter and Passover weekend and the Scape Art Show at Bacara Friday afternoon, I would move that we consider adjourning.
I'll second that.
Okay, we move to adjourn the meeting.